welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Coming to us now live from Ukraine, it's Terrell Jermaine Starr. He's been on many times before, a journalist. He has a Substack, which is very popular, terrellstarr.substack.com. You can check him out there, check him out on YouTube and more. Terrell, good to see you. Thanks so much for making time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure. So share with people, you're in the area of the capital. What's life like now? Because we see news stories where Putin has upped the amount of missiles being fired in drones. In fact, in the first 7 months of Trump, Putin has far eclipsed the daily amount of missiles and drones being fired than under Biden. So he's really stepped on the gas under Trump. And so what's life like right now for people?
In those few months, particularly in like June and July, terrifying because you hear explosions in the air. You're praying and hoping that those missiles and those drones don't reach your flat. So you wake up after the aftermath of these attacks and you see gutted out buildings, charred infrastructures around the city and around the country, and you just hope that you will not be a part of the news story, that your building will not be hit. And so every night when you're under these attacks, you can see the drones. I know I do. I see them and I hear them over the roof. Absolutely. And the idea is like, when it passes you, it's going elsewhere. So you hope that the air defense systems, which Trump has been very slow to procure and to speed up to get to Ukraine, you hope that those actually shoot down the drones and the ballistic missiles, but a lot of times that's not happening. And so each time you hear a drone or a missile fly over your head, it's going elsewhere, and you pray that it doesn't hit anyone else, but even though you're just thankful that it passed you. So you're living in this kind of in between of, okay, it's going to hit someone else, but I don't want it to hit me. And that's a constant thing. And you're also dealing with this uncertainty politically, where people are just hoping that Trump doesn't completely give up Ukraine, because it's really a holding phase at this moment that people honestly just want to wait out the Trump administration. I know that's a long time, but that's what a lot of people are hoping for.
So, we look at the whole conflict and Trump's leadership or lack of leadership through the prism of politics a lot. So I wonder, honestly, like in Ukraine, how do they view Donald Trump, and especially in his relationship with Vladimir Putin?
People, when I talk to them, and I've traveled all around the country, and when people find out that I'm an American, people ask me, right? And sometimes these conversations are tougher because I'm still learning the Ukrainian language, so I do my best to kind of like articulate within Ukrainian. But the word that people constantly say is kompromat, which is compromise. Like, a lot of people genuinely feel that Trump is compromised and that they have something on him. And the words that people use, idiot, that's the word. That's the common word. I mean, I know that's a simple thing, but you're asking me what Ukrainians say.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
That's what they tell me directly. And a lot of times, this is not even me prompting the conversation. The main thing that people are asking too is, how could they have made such a poor choice? And then that's when it gets complex, when I say, well, one, I didn't vote for him. And people like, Dean definitely didn't vote for him. And so, but then you have to talk to them about the racial politics of America. And that will give you a deeper understanding. And so the next response would be, I thought that America addressed all these racial issues. And I'm like, Olana, Victor. No, that's not true at all. And so for the first time, a lot of Ukrainians are starting to see the cracks in American democracy, and so that's the toughest part for them, because they thought that the Americans would never choose such leaders because they thought that we are above it. And now they realize that we aren't. And so it's more like a shell shock for them when they have these types of when they talk about America, because they've always looked at America as this major protectorate of Ukraine, because they go back to a person that neither of us cares for, in Ronald Reagan, right? But Ronald Reagan was that person that went to that said, tear down this wall, right? And so they have that memory, and that means a lot to people in this part of the world, or people like John McCain, and and they think about these people as like the defenders like against Russia on the Republican Party that no longer exists, right?
No, right.
Because as much as we don't care for Reagan, this is not even the party of Reagan that we're talking about anymore. And so they don't. And so with the Ukrainians, it's more about we're so shocked by this, and we don't know, like as citizens, how we're supposed to respond. So it's a learning experience for them.
I'm talking with our friend Terrell Jermaine Starr. Terrell, what is your take? I mean, you're a journalist. You've covered Trump for a long time. You've seen it. What do you think's going on with Donald Trump?
Well, he's really. Let's get directly to this meeting in Alaska. I don't think this meeting in Alaska had anything to do with Ukraine because Putin has already made his mind up about Ukraine. So if you listen to Russian language media, they continue to talk about Zelensky as an illegitimate president. They continue to have these propagandized segments on Russian state television where Putin will sit with some quote unquote historian, right, of this region, and they will point to a map that says, I see no history of Ukraine, which in one segment, interestingly enough, Ukraine was clearly there, like written there, which is a funny irony in like this whole propagandized segment that was on Russian state television. But if you have any knowledge of what's going on inside of Russia, you just have to look at their television, and it's clear what their positions are. And so and then also when you go to if you have a meeting like what he did with Putin, there are supposed to be conditions that are already set, kind of like how Obama did with the Iranians when they set up the Iran deal. The way that Trump functions is that he wants a Nobel Prize. That's the first thing. And so he needs this constant admiration that this prize will never give him, right? That's the main thing. But he wants to be able to say, I met with these people. Biden didn't do it. Obama didn't do it. So he has this childish way of trying to distinguish himself by actually meeting with people, even though it doesn't get anything done. And remember, he did this in his first term with Kim Jong-un. And the whole objective was to stop Kim Jong-un from continuing to proliferate with nuclear weapons. And we know that he has no incentive to do so. And so his behavior didn't change. But the way that Trump moves is that he can always say, I tried to talk to him, but they wouldn't listen. Okay. And that's the same thing that's happening with Ukraine. So he will say, I need to be given credit for bringing these two people to the table, even if preconditions, which is something that is signature in negotiation on a diplomatic scale. That's 101, right? That's the freshman class. Don't come to the table unless you have preconditions set, right? And so that's not the point with Trump. What he's doing is that he wants to propagandize this macho tough man thing of him setting up the photo op where he's sitting with these top people, and then he can really mythologize his the behind the scenes conversations, which are more than likely lies, right? For his base. That is the primary function of all of these meetings. So basically, I think that Trump really in this stage wants a Nobel Prize, a very childish signature of his self-importance, that the award, even if the Norwegians were to award it to him, which I don't see, it's not going to give him, it's not going to feel that childish desire to feel loved and adored and respected. And I know that people are, but it also fits this larger authoritarian trend in which Trump wants to be a part of, right? And so you notice, like with J.D. Vance and his cozying up with the AfD in Germany, which, by the way, they won with 20% in their parliamentary elections earlier this year. Now the recent opinion polls show they're going up by 26%. And so basically what they're doing is that they see this global trend where it's a global white supremacist trend in which people are, leaders around the world are galvanizing their electorates, their racist, right-wing, authoritarian leaning and friendly electorates to feeling that their whiteness is being devalued. And it's a very effective tool, which is why Trump is using it. And so what he's doing with Ukraine is just a simple one manifestation of that.
It's interesting when you talk about the world, what's going on. We're not in a vacuum here in America. the U.S. is leading on some level this movement, but also, just being allying with them in Ukraine.
It's the global leader. I'm sorry. I know we'll get to Ukraine, but I want to emphasize Ukraine. I would say that America is the global leader at this moment because it has the infrastructure to do so. So,
Sure.
right, and that's the main thing. And so it has the infrastructure from a legal standpoint to deport people. Look at what he's doing with ICE, right? He has the capacity and the financial resources to do so. It's really like, in a more morbid term, how Nazi Germany was able to kill so many Jewish people during the Holocaust. A lot of it, and again, when you dehumanize people, you think about them as cargo and as things to destroy. Germany set up an infrastructure to do this. And if you really, a lot of people don't like the comparison, but I tend to lean into it because I think it's a very similar dynamic in that Trump is pretty much taking a Gestapo-style form of government and creating a political infrastructure, a practical infrastructure, primarily by ignoring the courts, right? And not because he's just not listening to them, and he's taking the organs of the government at the federal level, which is enough because he's slowly going into states' rights with Illinois, threatening to send the National Guard to Chicago, right? Which is another racist white fantasy that he wants to fulfill for his base. But the primary reason why he can do this is because the federal infrastructure empowers him to do so. I think that's a very important thing to point out.
It's true. He has the power to back up what he says and not just talk empty threats. And then we're seeing that play out. In Ukraine, how was Zelensky's meeting with Trump? And there's a lot of other European leaders that showed up. It became actually like this impressive summit. But just from an optics point of view, back in Ukraine, when you're living under a war by this tyrant, Putin, what was the reaction of the Ukrainian people to Zelensky meeting with Trump?
So I'll give you a military standpoint because I talked to a number of people that's in the military right now who are active soldiers. As far and I was seeing, and there's one interview that I have up on my site on my YouTube channel right now with a Ukrainian born here, but he was raised in Brooklyn, but he came back. Basically, what he and other people I've talked to said is that no one is sitting around waiting for a peace agreement to happen. Everyone believed that this was farce. And then the soldiers, if you talk to them, they'll tell you that I've lost fellow soldiers to war, and I've been injured. Like right near me is a rehab hospital with soldiers who've lost legs, they've lost limbs, all fighting for land that Trump is telling them to give away, right? And so just imagine you're somebody who, had all their faculties, limbs, all this other stuff, and then you lose a limb fighting for territory that Trump is saying that you need to give to Putin. So why am I fighting? And so these are people who are already in a strained situation where they have far fewer soldiers to send, but they've decided that they're going to risk their lives anyway, right? A lot of these people are mobilized. A lot of these people are out there, and it's a deep offense to them. And so psychologically, they're not even set on the idea of ceding territory. And so they all believe that was a joke. That's the first thing. Now, when you think about the general civilians with this meeting, again, they feel like Trump is compromised. No one believed that anything was going to come out of it because for American audiences, now I want you all to understand this. When you hear Putin talk, you're getting 15-second snippets, 20-second snippets.
Right.
Every single day in Ukraine, we hear Putin talking in Russian. Okay? And this man says the most horrible, xenophobic things about Ukrainians. He and people in this administration and their one-party system in Russia, essentially, are saying all these inflammatory, using all this inflammatory language about Ukraine. So we don't need so when the Americans are having this conversation about, this is going to happen and that's going to happen, it really does. You all are missing a lot here, right? Because Russian state television says Ukraine is not a real country. Russian officials, from a MP level, a member of parliament perspective to an administrative perspective, are all saying that this is a breakaway country and there is no Ukraine. And meanwhile, you have tens of thousands of Ukrainian children that are being propagandized and put in ROTC style camps to fight against their own people. This is
Wow.
what the Ukrainian, yeah, it's true. So basically, the Ukrainians have at least about 10,000. There's an American NGO that has a number about 35,000 Ukrainian children that are abducted. And then you have there's a woman whose name I can't remember, but essentially she is on the same arrest warrant as Vladimir Putin, right, from the International Criminal Court, right? And she's the children's ombudsperson, and she says there are hundreds of thousands of children that we have rescued, right? But in fact, they've been kidnapped. Okay, and so and all these children are put into Russian orphanages to be put into Russian families to Russify them. And you also, when you talk about this meeting, and you're talking about what was said, what wasn't said, the Ukrainians are thinking, it doesn't matter what Putin said to Trump, because we know what he has said to us and about us. And so I would just ending off on that point is that I don't think that American media does a really good job of really expressing how Ukrainians are and get news out of Russia, because it's a language issue, and you're only getting 5% or 10% of what's happening. And I think the larger American public is misinformed on what Putin truly believes, and how Ukrainians are taking it, and how that informs their resistance against any major concessions.
I'm chatting with journalist Terrell Jermaine Starr, coming to us from Ukraine right now. So, Terrell, so the fact that Ukrainians hear the dehumanization by Putin and the idea that he wants the entire country, so the idea if they would give up the Donbas region, then I would imagine Ukrainians, I want you to tell me if this is accurate or not, are saying this is just a launching ground for him to take the rest of the country. This is not an end to the war. His goal is to take over our country, and he's not going to stop until he can achieve that.
Right. That's actually true. And I'll tell you something about the Donbas. Again, another thing that I think is important context, and I've never had the opportunity to really break it down because I've been on TV shows that only give you like 3 minutes. But the Donbas, right. I'm going to give you some real, like, those are people drag racing on my blog if you hear the background. But basically, I'm going to give you like some real internal baseball with Ukrainians that I think is really important for you all to know. Ukrainians have gone through their own cultural renaissance of their own self-identity, because Russia, for decades, you could actually say centuries, have worked to Russify Donbas. Okay? And so there are parts of this country that were Czechoslovakia, that were former Austro-Hungarian. There are parts, when you think about Lviv and Western Ukraine, that were Poland. And so this country has a whole bunch of cultural nuances about how they see themselves. And so the crown jewel for Russia has always been Crimea and Donbas, right? Because that's the area that they've Russified most. That's the area that has all the major minerals, which is something that people aren't really talking about a lot. It has a lot of natural resources that Russia is currently stealing at the moment to enrich themselves. And so it's not that Donbas is quote unquote Russian speaking. It's the place that they've mostly Russified. And that's a major distinction. And over the years, a lot of Ukrainians have bought into that themselves. And so it was really up until 2014, when the Russians invaded both those places and occupied them, that they started really reassessing their relationship with Russia in a meaningful way. And then when 2002 happened, all cards are off the table. You can't say anything here about Russia now. Like if it's the most anti-Russian like place that you could obviously imagine for obvious reasons. Back, in fact, before 2014, had Putin not done anything, he would have had far more control over this country politically than invading it. That's the biggest irony of this, okay? Because this country, I think, yes, like anybody who lives here and has studied this place will tell you that There was no conversations about NATO. There were no real conversations about the European Union. The Europeans, the people in Brussels, forgot about this place. So when 2002 happened and the Ukrainians were defending themselves, they were like, oh my God, these people can actually fight. So as much as the Europeans are praising the Ukrainians for their bravery, they also became a political inconvenience because they were not supposed to be at this advanced stage. They will never tell you that. The Europeans in private, many of them will tell you that, but Ukrainians are a political inconvenience because they're like, okay, we were not prepared to really defend and consider and incorporate this place into our country politically. And so when they talk about Donbas, which is the main point I'll sum it up quickly, is that yes, they definitely see this as a, like, because there's about, I forgot, there's a small percentage of the Donbas that the Ukrainians are still holding on to. And so, and it's like a heavily fortified place, right? And so if the Ukrainians just walk away from that, then the Russians take over that fortification. Okay? And so why would the Ukrainians give up the most fortified part of their country and just give it to the Russians? Because that's essentially what you're doing, right? That just from a common sense level, like that would not make sense. But that's what you're asking Ukrainians to do. So I built up over the years this hyper fortified place where even if we just have what we have right now without any major US aid or military aid coming in, like we can still kill thousands and thousands of Russians coming off on an offensive, like every week. But without this, you're compromising us. And so not only are you asking us to give up Crimea where they can just, set up their Navy and they can just launch all types of missiles at us all day, you're also setting us up for a major ground invasion for a third time.
Yeah.
And so, but the most important thing too that people don't get is that this is the Ukrainian population. There are a lot of statistics that are not statistics, but polls that talk about Ukrainians want a peace settlement, they're tired of war. Now that's true, but the problem with statistics, anyone that's taken a basic statistics course or a polling course knows that it's a guide, right? It's not an end all be all. It's supposed to give you a general understanding of what's going on in the country or what people are saying about any particular topic. Now, if you go behind the poll, like in order to really have a greater understanding of those polls, A, you have to be here. Two, you have to consume the local media, hear how the locals are talking about this. When the Ukrainians say they want to settle, a settlement, which is not something that's ever been made clear in these in these studies, it goes something like this. If Russia gave us, no, they're saying we're not going to give up any land, but realistically, a lot of people are thinking, if you take Donbas and give us Crimea, yeah, okay, like these are just hypothetical conversations. I'm not even saying that these are real things, right? But the crux of it is that the people here realize that, and by the way, the pre-war it was about 45 million people here. Currently, there are less than 30 million Ukrainians here. So this is a population drop of about 15, 16 million people. That's another thing. This country is far emptier than what it used to be before the war. And so they're saying if we give up all of Donbas, we might as well pack our bags and leave. And and the Europeans, another thing, Dean, that people aren't talking about is that the Europeans are already tired of the millions of refugees that are already there. If another war starts, do you really think that they're going to have the patience for millions more Ukrainians that are, and the Europeans, there are a lot of far right political, a lot of political movements that are talking that are based on kicking the Ukrainians out of their country because they're taking away from our public resources. It's all based on xenophobia talk and all these other things. But my point is that the Europeans don't want Donbas to be given up for the very simple reason that it will lead to another war. The Europeans know this, and it'll start another refugee wave that their economic and political infrastructure is not prepared for. Nobody is talking about this.
I think it's an excellent point. But you're giving us a bigger picture from on the ground there. And I appreciate you told us, because we hear our polls show that Ukrainians want a settlement. but doesn't mean they want to surrender. They
No.
want a settlement that's just, that it's going to protect them, their security for themselves and their families. Very last thing, Trump is trying to
Hey,
convince
Dean, let me tell you one more thing real quick on that. Here's another thing. I'm sorry. There's just so many. There's just a quick point. I talk to people. What people say to me on the record and off the record are different when it comes to territory. So when it comes to giving up land, there are people who will say defiantly, like, we are going to fight to the end, et cetera, et cetera. But then they get off record and then they'll tell me, I don't think I'm ever going home. So what I want to say to you is, what you don't hear in me, or in Western media that I get the benefit of because I'm here and I talk to these people every day and I'll never say their names. And no one will ever be able to identify who I'm talking about when I interview them, is that a lot of people definitely are preparing mentally to not to go back to their homes. They are, right? And so my point is that, yes, there is some openings from some people saying, I can settle for this and not that. But that's vastly different from people saying that they're going to surrender everything. That's all I always want to put that note.
No, and that's a great point. And I want to leave it there because I want to talk to you again in the future when we have more time, because we're running out of time here. But Terrell, if people want to follow your stuff, is the best place Substack, terrellstar.substack.com, or where
Absolutely.
else?
Substack, go to Substack, Terrell J. Starr on Substack, and Terrell J. Starr Official on YouTube. Those are the best places to follow me.
You're the best source of information because you're in Ukraine. You're telling us what the people are really seeing, and the U.S. media just sucks. Core media has gotten worse since Trump got back in. But thank you for spending time. I look forward to trying it with you. Hopefully, in a month or two, we'll catch up again and see what's going on. We'll see if anything has moved and the change and the mindset of the people in Ukraine.
I'll be here in the next couple months, so I'm looking forward to it.
All right, thanks, brother. Have a great day.
All right,